Have you ever been stuck in an elevator and tons of people just kind of cram in there and you think, this elevator feels kind of crammed. I think there's too many people in here. Have you ever thought that maybe about the world or about life in general? Tonight we're going to talk about people. Well, lots of people. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 21st episode of Adam Answers. I'm Adam and I answer things, not because I know everything, but because I love wrestling with difficult, challenging questions that we face in life, and I love to think through things, and I love to be challenged in the way that I think about things. I also love alliteration, which is why the original working title for the show was Adam Answers Absolutely Anything at All. Anyway, welcome. It is Wednesday, November 26th. I hope you're having a wonderful week. And if you are one of my American friends, happy Thanksgiving. Tomorrow is the Day of Giving Thanks. It is a holiday that was nationalized by Abraham Lincoln. And it's actually one of my favorite holidays. I don't really know a whole lot about the Puritans and the Pilgrims and all those things. I don't know any more than like kind of your average American would. I think it's just more of the idea of giving thanks and having a day where you share an incredibly delicious meal together with people. And you have Friendsgiving, which is Thanksgiving, but with your friends that you're really close with. I really love that holiday. But that's not what this episode's about. But happy Thanksgiving to everyone who is in America. Hope you have a wonderful time with your family, and hope you have a wonderful holiday. Yeah. So, a couple quick things before we dive into today's question. First thing I want to say is, if you have a question that you would like to ask, please scan the QR code up there. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your questions. I just want to hear what you have to say. So please scan that and fill out the form where you can ask a question, and I will devote an entire episode of the show to your question. There's also an opportunity for you to indicate whether or not you would want to be on the show, which would be such an incredible joy for me to have you on the show to wrestle with questions together with you. So please scan the QR code. I would love to hear from you. Also, I would love to hear your perspective on any of the questions that I cover here in the show. So please leave a comment. And if you feel so led, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It definitely helps the show and the algorithm get noticed. But I would love to hear from you and what your perspective is. I'm just one dude with one perspective, so I know that there is a wealth of incredibly beautiful perspectives out there, and I'm always excited to hear what those are. With those things out of the way, tonight is an episode about people. Well, more so about a lot of people. You ever feel like the world's just maybe a little bit overpopulated? A couple of years ago, 5, 6, a while ago now actually, in 2019, my brother and I were traveling from Seattle to Michigan, and we decided to stop in Yellowstone. And it was kind of a last minute thing, because though the whole reason for the trip is I was moving from Seattle to Michigan, and so it wasn't really a vacation or anything like that. But we decided, let's stop in Yellowstone. We might as well. We're on the way. So we get a hotel in, I forgot the name of the town, but it's a town just outside of Yellowstone. Can't remember the name of it. And we got a hotel room, and in the morning, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning. It was so early. My brother wakes me up and he's like, "Hey, we got it. Let's go. It's time to go." I'm like, "What? Like, what are you talking about? I'm sleeping, dude." Like, I was kind of grouchy in that morning, because I didn't understand why we had to get up at, the crack of dawn to go to Yellowstone. I thought, why can't we just wait and just, go when we've had sleep? So we get there to Yellowstone. We drive in, and there's like nobody there. I mean, it's like empty. The sun is just starting to come up, and we got some of the most beautiful photography I think that I had ever taken. Some of the most scenic shots that I've ever seen in my life there in Yellowstone. And there was no one around. There was maybe like one or two other people, like groups of people, but we got to see the buffalo, herds of buffalo, and I remember we saw a couple of wild wolves walk by across the path. It was just stunning. And as the sun came up and time went on, the park started filling up. I mean, it filled up big time. In fact, around like 9-ish, 10-ish, definitely by 10 or 11, it was so packed that you couldn't really go much of anywhere without running into large crowds of people. We went and we saw Old Faithful at the end of our day, and it was just packed. There was just tons of people standing around waiting for this geyser to kind of go off at its regular tone, which it usually always does, and it did, which was pretty cool to see. But I understood why my brother wanted us to go so early to Yellowstone, because there's so many tourists, so many people visiting these national parks throughout the year, especially throughout the summer, that it loses its almost idyllic charm. I like to think of Henry David Thoreau's cabin there by Walden Pond, which is funny because today, if you go there, it's not so reclusive. Like, it's not so secluded like it was back in his day. I mean, the whole reason he was there by that cabin was to get away from society and to get away from culture and everything, and the hum and ho of society around him, and to write. And he did, and he wrote some wonderful things. But if you go there today, all of the ground is just dirt that's been trampled on by hundreds and thousands of tourists that have gone through there seeing Henry David Thoreau's cabin that he lived in. And it's not so transcendental or idyllic anymore. And by the time that hundreds and hundreds of tourists poured in, I mean, just busloads of people poured into Yellowstone by the time we were getting ready to leave, it didn't feel as remote as it did in the morning. For a while now, it's been a growing problem that historical and natural cherished sites, like historical sites, natural sites, are in some ways being destroyed by tourists. And that's kind of been a growing issue. I mean, you think of Machu Picchu in Bolivia, I think. Machu Picchu, and how it's up on this mountain. And there's so many tourists that the roads are starting to degrade, as there's just bus after bus after bus driving up the mountain to unload, just shovel off tons of people into Machu Picchu. And even the terraces, right? There's these walkways that are terraces, and on top of the terraces used to be gardens, but it's at the bottom, underneath the terrace is like another walkway. Well, people walking on top of the terrace, they're wearing down like the stones, they're wearing down the structure, as thousands of people walk on the same stones over and over again. Every single year, they're starting to wear down, and then structural integrity of the site is starting to be a concern. Same thing with Venice, Italy. It's starting to be a concern when there's just cruise ships, cruise boats, one after the other, just shoveling people off into Venice. It's becoming extremely crowded in a city that can already feel crowded because it's, on stilts, so there's only so many places you can go. And one site after the next, feeling overcrowded. But the question is this: does it feel, to historical sites and tourist sites, is the over-tourist problem a result of overpopulation? Right? Because that might be my first assumption. My first assumption would be, well, there's just a lot more people now. So obviously, because there's a lot more people now, then there's just a lot more tourists. And so that's why these sites, are in danger, and we need to start being more cautious, and we need to start regulating the amount of people that can be at a site at any given time. And so, well, that's the problem. Well, yes, but also mostly no. What's interesting about world population is, yes, the world population has exponentially grown since I don't know, since like the 1800s or since the 1700s, it has exponentially grown. Sorry, I'm trying to get this like chart up, but there's so many ads that I can't actually see the chart. Okay. It has exponentially grown. In fact, there's around 8.2 billion people currently in today's population, which, by the way, like 58% of the world's population lives in Asia, which would include India. So the population has exponentially grown, especially since 1700 to today, in large part thanks to the Industrial Revolution. This isn't new news or anything, right? This has kind of been something that a lot of people have been aware of. The Industrial Revolution created an exponential population boom. A tremendous change did occur, whereas it had taken all of human history until around 1800 for the world population to reach 1 billion. The second billion was achieved in only 130 years. So that's how quickly and exponential the growth was as a result of the Industrial Revolution. But here's the thing. The yearly growth rate has been going down since the 60s. What that means is every year, the rate at which the population grows compared to the previous year has actually been decreasing since the 60s. So next year, 2026, the rate at which the population is going to grow might be 0.84 or might be 0.83% of the previous year. In other words, what that means is, yes, the population is still growing, right? It's still getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But as the yearly growth rate decreases, that is eventually going to slope off, and it's eventually going to plateau, and then it's eventually going to start decreasing. That's a whole nother conversation, which is there's a lot of people actually talking about population collapse in the next century. I mean, I won't be around to witness that. I don't think most of us will actually. I don't think any of us will be around to witness that. But within the next 100 years, there's going to be a dire problem because of how steep the yearly growth rate has actually fallen over the past few decades. And as a result, within 100 years, the population rate's going to, rather than increase, it's going to start decreasing, which means that there's less people alive to replace the workforce than there is today. So essentially what I'm saying is this. Yes, the population is increasing, but that's not necessarily the only reason why there is an over-tourism problem. That's not necessarily the only reason why it feels like you can go to somewhere like the Louvre and go see the Mona Lisa, and there's like 300 people surrounding you with their cell phones out trying to take a picture of the Mona Lisa so they can prove that they had a moment and saw something historical. It's not necessarily just because of population. I would actually argue that over-tourism has happened because of things like accessibility of locations, right? Like travel, air travel, train, cars, boats, just the whole smorgasbord, they've become more accessible. I mean, like 50s, 60s, you could travel by plane, but it was not as accessible to everyone, especially everyone in the world. Yet now we live in an age of significantly more accessibility. Also, more affordability. More people can afford to travel now than they could decades ago. And not only that, but there's more exposure. Meaning people, if you follow one of those Instagram van life bohemian girls, there's pick your flavor. There's a billion of them, and they all post their photography pictures of some travel, and then there's like some cute quote about life and living life or something like that. If you follow one of those, then you'll be exposed to places that you'd like want to go visit. And so that person's following brings more traffic into places like Machu Picchu, because you have followers who follow these Instagram influencers and who give more exposure to these places. So there's a lot more reasons than just overpopulation. In fact, I would argue that population growth is actually less of an issue. Sorry, and I shouldn't say less of it. It's actually a secondary issue compared to the connectedness of the world, like the age that we live in. Because I could ask this question not just about tourism, okay? Like let's not talk about tourism. Let's talk about the job market. What about the job market? Why does the job market feel so saturated? I mean, why does being a YouTuber or being a content creator on any social platform feel so saturated? And a better question is novelty dying? I mean, I remember this scene in The Truman Show where Truman's a kid and he stands up and he says, "I want to be an explorer." And the teacher rolls down the map and he said, "Well, everything's already been found." It kind of feels that way. Like we live in an age where it feels like everything's been found. It feels like everything has been done. Every song has been sung. Every photo has been taken. And it feels like every film has been made. Every joke's been said. It feels that way. It feels like novelty is slowly dying. Why does it feel that way? Well, the job market feels saturated because, well, there's more visibility of competition. I mean, these are the direct results of an interconnected world that we live in. Where I go on LinkedIn and you could apply for a job. When I do, I can see, oh, this job has 100 plus applicants or 1,000 plus applicants. So I get more exposure to the application process and I see how many people have actually applied for this position. Another thing is competition today is now global compared to 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and it wasn't. I mean, 30 years ago, I go and apply for a job, I'm mostly competing with people in the same community or in the same state. Remote work and online tools means that you're no longer just competing locally. And yes, a lot of this is a result of post-pandemic work culture. Because of the pandemic, it's so much more acceptable, so much more attainable, easier to do work remotely. I work remotely. And as a result of that, I'm not just competing with someone who also lives in the eastern United States or the Midwest. Now I'm competing with, someone who lives in Brazil or someone who lives in India or someone who lives in Germany or the Philippines. You're competing with a lot more people for similar positions. Also, another really big factor to the job market is the barriers to entry are a lot lower now to many careers. Not all careers, obviously, right? I'm sure the barrier to entry to be a surgeon is still significantly high, as it should be. But it feels like design, marketing, coding, media, all things like that. The barriers of entry are lower because, well, you can teach yourself at home now. There's so much more accessibility to information. You have so much access to free courses, so much access to tools, free tools. If you want to become a video editor, you can just download DaVinci Resolve, open YouTube, and teach yourself to become a video editor. And you can build a career from your computer in your bedroom. You could build a career. And so the barriers for entry, they're a lot lower than they once were. So there's more people entering, and not only are there more people entering, but you're competing with a lot more people given the global connectedness of working remotely and working at home. I mean, YouTube and content creation feels saturated too. I mean, if you think about just 10 years ago, and I know I talked about this a little bit more at length in my video I did a specific episode about content creation, so go ahead and check that video out. But it feels like more saturated today than it was 10 years ago. I mean, early YouTubers, like if you started a YouTube channel in like 2013 or 2012 or something like that, they felt like they benefited because they were early to the game. There weren't as many creators in the pool back then as there is today. Now, every niche, we shouldn't even use the word niche anymore. Every niche, no matter how niche you think that it is, gaming, finance, lifestyle, commentary, productivity, advice, whatever, Every niche has thousands of creators instead of just a few handful. And algorithms, they reward familiar formats. They reward formats that are successful. That's why you see a lot of copycat YouTubers. One YouTuber comes out who was kind of the first of his niche or the first of his kind or first of his format, and he does really well. Boom, he's exploding. Suddenly he's got 10 million subscribers out of the blue. Now, okay, well, now you see 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 channels suddenly come out of the woodwork that look exactly like that one guy's channel. Well, that's because it's a format that works. And if it's a format that works, the algorithm's going to favor those formats, encouraging creators to copy what works rather than being innovative and making everything feel the same. That's why when you're on YouTube's, when you go to your homepage on YouTube and you're just scrolling down through your recommendeds, that's why you can notice very quickly patterns that make everything look the same. All of the thumbnails just look the same. Every thumbnail has a person in it, and the person is making some very obvious, poignant gesture, and then there's some object or some text in the background that's he's either pointing to or like an arrow is pointing to. Every single, and it's all just hyper photoshopped and whatnot. Well, it all looks the same because it works, or our human psychology thinks that it works, and so it tells us that we want to watch this video. The algorithm sees that and says, ooh, I want more of that. And so then people start copying it. Today, I mean, that's a huge problem on YouTube today. If a channel becomes successful, and it's somewhat unique or somewhat niche, novel, if a channel becomes successful, immediately there's 50, 60 channels copying the exact same structure of that channel, trying to siphon off as much of its success as it can. It's a problem. But why does it feel? Why does it really feel like there's no novelty anymore? I think we've said a few of these things already, but hyperexposure. I mean, you see more content today than earlier generations saw in months. I mean, in the 90s, 80s, 90s, I'd see things on TV, or I'd go to the store and I'd see magazines. I'd see things in magazines. I mean, that was my exposure. Or you'd go rent a movie. That was your exposure. Like, you were pretty limited on what you could see and realistically see. I mean, because you didn't go to the store every day, so you didn't see magazines every day. And you didn't rent movies every day, so you didn't see movies every day. But everyone had a TV, or at least most people had a TV, so you'd watch TV. But again, there was only a limited number of channels, especially in the days of the bunny ears antennas when you had analog television. There were only so many channels that you could watch, and so you're only exposed to so much culture. That's one of the reasons why culture was so much more homogenous back then than it is today. Again, I actually did an entire episode on mainstream culture. I highly recommend you to go listen to that episode about why is mainstream culture dying. But there's more exposure today because we have our smartphones. And I can, just from my smartphone, I can be exposed to just any kind of cultural media, cultural content that you could possibly imagine. Not just my culture, but from any culture, I could go and be exposed to it. I can go see what's going on in Germany or see what's going on in Spain or anything like that. And so I'm constantly exposed to it. And then I'm exposed to it on my computer or your tablet. You can be exposed to it on a smartwatch, on a watch. And you have video games, then you have TV still, obviously. Algorithms, they push similar content, and it leads just to cultural homogeny. Like, just everything's the same. Everything looks the same, everything feels the same, because the culture, or the algorithms, any social media algorithm is choosing what content to promote and what content that it feels like there's an audience for, it feels like people will watch. So then everyone's like, oh, okay, we got to do this thing because this is what the algorithm wants. So everything starts to look the same because everyone's trying to get the attention of the algorithm. I think another big factor is that creative tools are widely accessible. Like I said, I could download DaVinci Resolve today, pop open YouTube, watch some tutorials and become a video editor. I mean, if you really, really put the effort in, put the time in, you could just totally pivot a career just by watching tutorials. You could totally pivot your career. Download Blender, become a 3D artist. Download, you can even use Blender to do 2D animation with grease pencil. You become a 2D artist. You could do CAD design. You could teach yourself an innumerable number of things just from YouTube, from free courses. And AI is making, and that's a whole nother conversation. Again, I have done a video about AI, talking about AI, but AI does make a lot of things more accessible. I mean, in some degree, because they still want you to pay an arm and a leg for their AI credits and subscription models, which is pretty dumb. But it's hypothetically makes things more accessible, because now, anyone can put together a storyboard and anyone can make a music video. But because these creative tools are accessible, essentially what we're talking about here is the democratization of creativity. The fact that there's no bar, or there's no, I guess what I should really say is obstacle to having access to the creative industry, to the creative sphere. That barrier has gotten so low that just about anyone can walk over it. The tools are free. The courses and tutorials are free. And with AI, now it's faster and more efficient. Editing software and music tools. And essentially what happens is noise has become increased. So what I mean by noise is just generated things, made things. Once there was 100,000 people making content, now there's millions of people, hundreds of millions of people making content, all with their own channel, all with their own podcast, all with their own account, all of them speaking, all of them using tools, all of them making content. And it's increased the amount of noise that's out there in the sphere, that's out there kind of in the connected world. There's just so much noise, it could be hard to take the noise and organize it, or take the noise and sift through it and find the essential parts or the important parts. Novelty has shifted from completely new ideas to combinations of new and existing ones, or a combination of existing ideas. I think that's the world that we are in and are moving towards. I think that's why you have a lot of retextured intellectual property in the form of movies. Like, I think that's why a lot of Hollywood films are just kind of rehashed reboots. I wouldn't say that, I think in the 90s, I remember, maybe it wasn't. I remember someone in the 90s had said that they thought Hollywood was out of ideas. In the 90s, someone said that. I don't think that was true in the 90s. So there were some pretty credible ideas in the early 2000s. But now, if you know anything about what's been going on and what's been happening with the film industry, Hollywood's dying, by the way. Hollywood is dying, and I don't know how long it will stick around, but it's dying. And part of the reason it's dying is because it's lost its novelty. It's lost its ability to make good ideas. A lot of people say that, it's because we live in an age where the novelty isn't in a new idea, but in a combination of existing ideas in ways that maybe hadn't been done before. Like, most modern creative breakthroughs are mostly just hybrids of what already existed. Like TikTok, for example, short form video plus editing plus music. That wasn't, like, Vine was around before TikTok was. New forms often arise from recombining old elements in ways that weren't possible before. Another thing is, we compare today's saturated landscape to, like, our personal past, right? Like, if I'm, like, me, like, today, I'm comparing the landscape of today to my past. Well, it's kind of hard because I'm older now, and so I'm a lot more aware. I have a longer history of culture. I have a longer history of things now than I did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I didn't have as much exposure to culture as I do today. I mean, when I was 20, 25, I had exposure to culture for sure, obviously, but I was still pretty young. I was still learning about the world. I was still discovering things. Now that I'm in my mid-30s, I still have a lot to discover, sure. Everyone's always going to have a lot to discover. But as you get older, you discover more. And so, of course, the world is going to feel less novel as you discover more things about it. And as you visit more places, and as you have more experience, as you recognize more patterns in the world. As you get older, the world becomes less magical, unfortunately. That's not to say that it loses its magic, but it's to say that as you get older, it becomes less magical because there's less mystery involved. Because you've seen all the corners with a flashlight, and you've taken things apart and tinkered with them, and you understand the complexities of the world in a way that you didn't 10 years ago or 15 years ago. You know, you see endless examples of similar content as you get older because you've seen this before. Oh, I remember seeing this before 5 years ago. You see more things, and so you see more patterns. And it makes originality feel rare because you've been exposed to a significant amount of content. As you develop pattern recognition, novelty becomes harder to perceive, unfortunately. So we are living in an overexposed, overconnected era. Is the population growing? Yes. But I would say that the tensions that we feel in culture, that some of us might feel right now, the tensions that we feel of oversaturated markets and oversaturated life actually have less to do with the population of the world and more to do with being overexposed and overconnected as a world. There's more creators, more competition, and more content than ever. Trends come and go faster and faster. You want to talk about Moore's Law? Right? Moore's Law is like the law that states that every 5 or 10 years or something like that, the processing speed of a CPU doubles, but or the number of transistors that you can fit on one doubles. But the rate at which trends come and go has exponentially grown faster and faster over the past decade. It leaves less time for anything to actually feel new. We're consuming content at such a high pace, such an insanely fast pace that we don't have time to actually enjoy a piece of content, appreciate it for what it is before it's out the door and the next thing is in front of us. I think that's one of the unfortunate shames and consequences of short-form content. Short-form content just gives you information in the smallest form, maybe not the smallest form. I'd say maybe a tweet is a smaller form, but it's such a small form to be able to see something in 30 seconds and actually have gained something from it. At a certain point, your parameters for conveying information are so small, they're so narrow, that you're losing a significant amount of information that makes that information valuable. Remember how last week when I had Nate on the show, we were talking about music. And one of the things that we talked about was how music is art and how art needs a context. There's not just a piano piece. There's not just a guitar piece, but there's a context behind that. I think of that painting. I don't remember if I mentioned this when we did the episode, but there's the painting, Christina's World, and it was painted in, I want to say the 50s by Andrew Wyeth. And in the painting, there's a woman laying in a grassy field, and she's looking up like longingly at this farmhouse in like a rural area out on a farm. She's laying in the field. And when you look at the painting, it does give you a sense of sadness. Like you have this sense of this woman obviously wanted something. But she can't seem to attain it. Like it seems like she's looking at something that she wants, and there's something really sad about that. But when you understand the context, suddenly the emotion gains a lot more weight than it did when you first looked at the painting. When you realized that there was actually a woman named Christina Olsen who was paraplegic and she couldn't walk, and she refused to use a wheelchair, she refused to use a walker, and her family were friends with Wyeth's the painter and his wife, and she refused to use a wheelchair her entire life, and so for her entire life she dragged herself on the floor with her arms, and she was 55 when he painted the painting. And as you look at the painting with that context in mind, you realize that what he's representing is the life that she never could have, but she so desperately wanted. And there she lay on the floor, on the ground, with her arms propping herself up, looking at the normal life that she could never have. Context is information. And when we are cycling through content faster and faster and faster, and it's shorter and shorter and shorter, we are losing information. Sorry for getting a little sidetracked there about short-form content, but maybe I'll do an episode on information. Instant global discovery makes new ideas feel old almost immediately. Meaning, like, you could post something, and immediately that idea just spreads. And as soon as it spreads, it's gone out of the consciousness because there's another idea. That's what happens when you have hundreds of millions of people all speaking at the same time. Is that the moment that some person says something that the algorithm happens to notice, and it happens to be a well-spoken thing or an interesting thing, it almost immediately becomes irrelevant again, because as soon as they're done speaking, someone else has said something also interesting. So I asked Gemini, I said, hey, do you think there's novelty in the world? And it said, sure, there's still novelty in the world. And this is what it said. It said, this is where novelty still exists, and it always will. It says, in personal experience, your perspective is unique, even if the genre isn't. Okay, right, like everyone's personal experience is unique, sure. Emotional expression, there's endless variations of emotional expression. I mean, yes, I would agree. There's endless ways to express emotion, but at a certain point, it becomes so incredibly nuanced that I'm not really sure what the difference is. In new contexts, mediums, and combinations of ideas. This is essentially the idea of taking things that already exist and combining them to create something that's kind of an aggregate of two or more things that already exist. Emerging technologies. This is where novelty exists. AR, VR, AI, biotech, and other emerging tools. Artistic style. Sure, I could see that. I mean, even today, there's still new and intriguing artistic styles being created. Some better than others, but... So where does this leave us? I mean, I think for me, I ask this question. I kind of was getting to this at the beginning of the episode. I like to ask the question, would there ever be a day where every song that could ever possibly be written has been written? Every combination of food that could ever be prepared has been prepared. Every story that could ever be written has been written and has been told. I ask myself, is it possible that the world could ever that world could ever exist? Could we ever live in a world like that, where every single thing has been done? There is nothing, literally nothing left. And the moment you think about something, it's immediately, indexed against the vast library of things that have already been done, and bam, there it is. You can find it. I don't think so. I don't think that is a possibility. And the reason I don't think that is because of my philosophy on the ontology of art. Right? Because I don't just believe that art is an intentional creation to provoke emotion within an audience, right? That's kind of Tolstoy's perspective. Again, I also did an episode on art, so I'd love for you to go back and listen to that. We talked about art, like what is art? It was a really good episode. But not only is that part of my definition, but another part of my definition, especially the ontology of art, is that it is nested in the creative mind of who God is. Essentially, whenever I create something that's art, whether it be a dish, whether it be a painting, a piece of music, or a dance, that thing is an expression of the creative power of who God is. And God is an infinite God, meaning I don't believe that there will ever be a point at which we have exhausted all creativity. I don't think it's possible. I don't think we'll ever even remotely come close. Yes, the world feels saturated. It does. But I think that's just because we're exposed to so much. And our minds, our brains, aren't able to process the amount of information that's being thrown at us on a daily basis. That we have analysis paralysis, and it's getting worse. Because there's so many options. There's so many YouTube videos left to watch. Like when we're on the YouTube home feed, there's so many options to choose from. That so many times you just give up. Like, I don't know what to watch. If you're on Netflix or on, Prime Video, you just don't know what to watch. Because there's so many choices. See, the problem isn't that, well, there's nothing new anymore because there's so many people creating things. No. There's always going to be millions of people creating things. The problem is that we're so hyper-connected to it. And we have this obsession with having to consume all of it. Because we're all afraid of missing that one important thing. Or we're all afraid of missing that one life-changing thing. And so, yeah, we're addicted to constantly consuming all of the information that comes across our feeds. Because it's like we're playing the lottery, essentially. And if I scroll today, maybe I'll find that one thing that changes my life. Or that one thing that makes it all better. That one thing that entertains me more than I've been entertained in a dozen years. I think connectedness is the problem. And that's another thing that maybe we'll touch on later in a different episode. But if you watch, I actually did a YouTube video about AI and the Great Unplugged, where I talk about how AI is exacerbating a problem that has already existed. And that problem is the hyperconnectedness of culture, and that how the hyperconnectedness of culture is an issue. And I made that video about 1.5 years ago, actually. And today, recently, just the past couple of weeks, I've seen people talking about that very thing. I have seen a movement of people starting to really grow and gain momentum who are serious about unplugging and stepping away from the hyper-connected reality we live in. And I'm getting close to that point in many ways. And again, I'll talk about that in maybe a different episode. But I think that the hyper-connectedness is the biggest issue of why the world feels saturated. Yes, the population's growing, and it's just going to keep growing. In fact, I think that in the year, what was it, like 2100 or something? I don't remember what the projection was, but the population is going to hit 10 billion. So it's just going to keep growing. But the population itself is not the issue. It's what we're doing. So why do we feel so overwhelmed? Honestly, it's because we're so connected, which feels counterintuitive. Because you'd think to yourself, well, wait a minute, isn't it a good thing? Shouldn't we all be connected as a human race, as a population? Isn't it a good thing for us to be all connected? Well, yes and no. Mostly no. And maybe we'll get into that in a different episode. But if you've been listening, I just want to say thank you. I hope you have an incredible and blessed night. And I hope that you don't feel saturated. Hope the only thing that's saturated tomorrow is your mashed potatoes with gravy. And I hope that you have an incredible Thanksgiving if you're in America and you're listening to this. And I hope